We are here with Rory from the University College London and Goran from Central European University. You both presented today your common joint project on Between Class and Nation, Working Class Communities in 1980s Yugoslavia. Can you tell us a little more about your project and what your aim is with it?
Sure. So the project originated here at the University of Graz, and we've been researching on it for the past 4 years. And as the title says, the idea was to look at the working class communities in late socialist Yugoslavia, specifically in Montenegro and Serbia, and try to see how the crisis of Yugoslav socialism was reflected on the shop floor inside the Yugoslav industry. The Yugoslav industry and the workers' self-management were very crucial for all the scientists dealing with Yugoslavia in the 60s, 70s, partly 80s. But then all of a sudden, after the wars and the breakup of Yugoslavia, this aspect has been kind of marginalized. So we try to recenter on the working class, on labor, on the institutions of self-management, and try to see how this aspect of Yugoslavia and its existence contributed to the discussions, the mass mobilizations happening in Yugoslavia at the time.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, a starting point was that of all of the numerous studies about the demise of Yugoslavia from various perspectives, so thinking of works on intellectuals, political histories, so we found it quite curious that of all of this huge body of literature, actually there's no single study that really focuses on workers themselves. And this is maybe even more interesting or a little bit strange when we consider that workers were implicated in the sort of the collapse of the Yugoslav system, the collapse of socialism, the rise of Milosevic to power. And so they also formed a huge demographic. I mean, Yugoslavia was a worker state, so it seemed sort of logical to look at the dissolution of the state in terms of its constituency. So the way we approached it was to, we're trying to rely on sort of bottom-up case studies of 4 different working class communities in Serbia and Montenegro. So these are, of course, one is in Belgrade, Rakovica, sort of an industrial suburb in the Yugoslav and Serbian capital. We looked at Zrenjanin, which is a city in the north, in Vojvodina, the north of Serbia. We looked at Priboj, which is a smaller city in a multi-ethnic area of Sandžak in southwestern Serbia, and Nikšić in Montenegro, which is a major industrial center there. And so in each of these communities, we've approached them as sort of different levels of analysis. So we're looking at sort of the domain of the home and everyday life, the workplace, and then right up to the sort of strikes and public interventions, which throughout the 1980s were sort of increasing in sort of the number of instances and in scale as well. And really by the end of the decade, in the second half of the 1980s, I think Yugoslavia probably had one of the highest rate of strikes per capita in Europe at the time.
Mm-hmm. And, these strikes, these movements of the working class are indeed recognized in the historiography and social sciences dealing with Yugoslavia. However, usually there is a certain bias in explaining these mobilizations, claiming that, people had social demands and they were pro-Yugoslav orientation. And then all of a sudden, once they gathered in the streets and heard the speeches of the nationalist-oriented politicians, the leadership of the Serbian party at the time, personified by Slobodan Milosevic, they suddenly overnight became national subjects. So there is this famous saying, they came as workers and returned homes as Serbs after hearing Slobodan Milosevic. So our idea basically was to explain this process, to track these discussions, grievances, dissatisfaction inside the industry throughout the 1980s and see what were the mechanisms through which they connected to the official discourse of the party leadership.
Can you share with us some of your conclusions or findings from your research in brief points?
A couple of brief points. Well, I think one of the major sort of issues that goes through all of the case studies is that sort of the connection between socialism and nationalism, and I think one of it is the sort of the reinterpretation of the exploiter and the exploited in sort of shifting from Marxist terms to national terms. So in a way, this gave quite a bit of legitimacy, particularly in Serbia in the 1980s. So it sort of created a situation where if one was to go against the politics of Milosevic publicly, they were going against workers, which is sort of anathema in late Yugoslav socialism. This is one of the key things, I think.
And I mean, there is this constant theme of Yugoslav solidarity as well, taking place next to this so-called Serbian reawakening in the late 1980s, and this is very noticeable in the working class neighborhoods. So the political message of the Serbian leadership at the time was very elastic and flexible, able to absorb also these older pro-Yugoslav understandings and yearnings. However, at a certain point, with no institutional mechanisms to really practice this solidarity with workers in other republics, a part of the workers definitely reoriented towards these national mobilizations as a kind of a more tangible way of expressing solidarity and moving things forward politically, introducing reforms.
And then from the other side, you have sort of more economically liberal currents within Serbia who are pushing for a re-centralization for economic reasons. Sort of the logic being that it would be more effective, there would be less sort of disintegration, let's say, in an economic sense. So this kind of conversion, in a sense, throughout the 1980s. So
there was definitely a conversion between this push for re-centralization of Yugoslavia as a state and the conditions inside the Yugoslav factories, because what you had during the 1970s was a kind of a decentralizing push inside the industry as well, with all the enterprises, the industry divided into very small entities, units called BOs or ORI in Serbo-Croatian.
Basic organizations of associated labor.
And what happens in the 1980s during the economic crisis is that this institutional setup becomes really dysfunctional, with different BOs, different ORI fighting each other and kind of preventing normal functioning of the enterprises. So the workers really kind of connected their micro problems inside the enterprises with this call for more unity and clarity of institutional solutions within Yugoslavia. So this was one of the concrete ways in which their everyday concerns and grievances were connected to these higher political ideas.
Well, it sounds like you've had 4 years of very exciting research. Thank you for sharing with us both what you're researching, but also some of the conclusions you've had. And I hope you continue to enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.